guys, welcome to my video. Today we're going to look at the bench press. We're going to have quite the emphasis on looking at the powerlifting bench press rather than the bodybuilding bench press. I will explain the differences as we go on and how we can utilise powerlifting methods in a bodybuilding fashion as well. We're going to be very much looking at the basics, how to set up the bench press in terms of the rack and everything from there, including grip and your powerlifting arch, leg drive, that sort of stuff. So number one, making sure we've got the correct height for the J hooks. We don't want to be having to kind of overreach as we unrack the bar. We also don't want to be halfway through a rep to unrack the bar. It does depend on your arm length and the squat rack itself, but we want to be somewhere in the middle of overreaching and half a rep. So right now for me, I know at number 10 is roughly the correct height. Once we've established the height of the J hooks, we certainly want to take into account whether we've got someone spotting us or whether we need the spotter bars on the rack. If we're going particularly heavy, then we definitely need a spotter, and if we don't have a spotter, then we definitely need the spotter bars on. It's trying to find that position where it still allows for as much range of motion as we can, but also allows to catch the bar without a spotter there. So I know if I set up with the spotter bars at number 3, I am able to get out of that position. I'm pretty lucky in that respect with this bench height and with these spotter bars and this particular squat rack. I can find a really good position where I can still get a full range of motion because of the arch I'm using, and also save myself using the spotter bars. So for me to require a spotter isn't there with this particular setup. If you're unlucky and you're not able to quite set up your bench and spotter bar system, you might have to be forced into a reduced range of motion. There are a few other options out there. I'm not going to talk about those because they are really compromising safety, and that is not what I'm looking to do here in this video. I want to make sure safety is there, and that is of the utmost importance from my point of view, so I'm not going to condone anything else. Now we have our squat rack set up, ready for our benching. What I'm going to talk about now is leg drive and creating an arch. This is very powerlifting based. Like I said at the start, it doesn't mean you can't take a pinch of salt out of the powerlifter's book and utilize it in a bodybuilding manner. So do bear this in mind, even if you are looking at bodybuilding. Now there are many different methods out there for setting up your legs, setting up your arch. I'm going to show you my favourite way. What you might want to do is look into different methods, find what works for you, and go from there. With every big lift in particular, you're going to find you fine-tune it over many years. So you might find one method work for a while, and then all of a sudden you discover another way. You might even tweak that current method just slightly, and you find you get into a bigger arch position. So what I like to look to do first is set up my feet. Then I like to wiggle myself down using the bench or using the squat rack. Allow me to demonstrate. So what you'll notice I do is I set myself up a little far behind the bar. Then I place my feet into position. I try and keep them as symmetrical as I can. Once I've set myself up there and my bum is in the right position on the bench, then I'll start to push myself down and look to create that arch, trying to get my spine up towards the ceiling as much as I can. keeping my feet flat, keeping my hips on the bench, and making sure my upper back stays on the bench. That is setting up the arch. What you might find is it's a little awkward arching your back in such a position that you might find a bit of soft tissue feels pinched and uncomfortable. If that's the case, reduce your arch. Find what's comfortable for you. The goal of the powerlifter is to create as much arch as you can. Another important thing about when you set up your arch for the bench is you need to set your body up in the correct position so that you're not going to hit these J hooks. So what I always describe it as, you've got your eyeballs this side of the bar. Then, whilst you're benching, chances are pretty slim that you're going to hit these J hooks. Now we're going to talk about leg drive. Leg drive is very much the foundation of a powerlifting bench. Already we have set up our arch, our lower back should be tense. Now we're going to engage the quads, we're going to engage the glutes, we're going to very much make the bench press a whole body movement. And this is very much the difference between a bodybuilding bench press and a powerlifting bench press. Powerlifting bench, we're looking to shift as much weight as we can. We don't really care what muscles we use, we just want to make sure that weight goes up. So if we can use leg drive, then we shall. So a way of thinking of looking to engage those quads and engage the glutes is, I like to think of literally just squeezing the butt cheeks together, and also I press down into my feet. A good way my powerlifting coach described to me was as if you're putting on a pair of slippers. So you're really pushing the floor away from you. In that process, try not to let your feet slip, otherwise you're going to lose all that tension that you've gained. Also, another note with leg drive, try not to drive so hard into the floor that your hips lift up. If your hips start lifting up, that's where you need to start looking at adjusting your feet. Now that's down to the individual once again. You might find a wider stance stops your hips from lifting. You might find a narrower stance stops your hips from lifting. You might find you need some blocks underneath your feet to raise your feet up in order to stop your hips from lifting. Experiment. Make sure your setup doesn't raise your hips at the end of the day. While we're gripping the bar, what we want to do is try to get the bar into the heel of the palm. We really don't want it high up in the palm, otherwise what you might find is it forces your palm, your fist, to go backwards. We want to try and keep a straight line with your knuckles facing the ceiling, so the bar weight travels through the bone rather than outside of it. The way I like to describe our grip is I'm shoving the bar into the bottom of my palm. Knuckles face the ceiling. Once I've set up my feet and I've set up my arch, now we need to start looking at our grip. Now this is going to be highly dependent on the individual. What we first need to do is find a landmark where our hands feel comfortable. Maybe it's using one of these power rings, whatever it is, so long as you remember the next time you go into your bench where that grip is. That way you can eliminate any variables when you accidentally grip a little too wide or accidentally grip a little too narrow. Each time you'll find that same grip. As I said, grip is very individual. What I would say is experiment, feel where is most comfortable for you. What I would suggest is try not to go too narrow. So when I say too narrow, I wouldn't suggest going shoulder width. And then I would also suggest try not to go too wide. Now when I say going too wide, try not to go at about a 45-degree angle at the shoulder. So anywhere roughly in between there, and just feel for what is comfortable for you. With a narrow grip, what you're going to find is there's an emphasis on the triceps. With a wider grip, there's going to be an emphasis on the pecs. Ideally, we want a mixture emphasizing all the muscles involved. We don't want to favor one or the other unless we have a particular strength or a particular weakness. Again, down to the individual. Now we've established what is comfortable for our mobility and our strength in terms of the grip. We want to also make sure the upper back is tense as well. Already in that arch, the lower back should be feeling a lot of tension. We want to pass that tension down from the upper back as well. The upper back is not going to help us in our pressing power, but it's going to certainly help us in the descent of the bar, and it's going to set up a really good foundation for us to press off of. If our foundation is wobbly, it's going to be very difficult to press off such a wobbly base. So creating that strength through the upper back is going to really help with that. A good way of describing what we're trying to do with our shoulder blades is we're trying to squeeze them back and down. Almost think like we're trying to tuck the shoulder blades into the back pockets of our trousers. And that's a really good way of keeping the shoulders very stable. Another way I like to picture trying to set up the upper back is I almost walk my shoulder blades down my back until I find I've almost pinched them together. What I want you to do now is make a note of my elbow position. If I flare out my elbows too wide, what you might find is there's a lot of emphasis on the chest and the shoulders, but the triceps don't get much of a look in. What we also do is increase the chances of a shoulder impingement. We want to reduce that. We also don't want to tuck our elbows in too much. The pecs don't get as much of a look in with that in mind. The triceps get overemphasized. So we want to find a happy ground between the two, so we're getting all the muscle groups involved that we can. That flaring and tucking of the elbows, again, is going to be very individual to you. If you happen to have really powerful triceps, go for it. Go for that narrow grip. Go for that tucked elbow position. If you have very powerful shoulders, very powerful pecs, then you might find a wider grip and a much more flared elbow is going to press more weight for you. So find what works optimally. Another point about the elbows is I want the bar to travel behind my elbows, or my elbows to travel in front of the bar, especially as we're pressing back up. Or at least have the elbows beneath the wrists. I'll show you both examples. So, notice how my elbow is going to travel beneath my wrist. As I'm pushing back up, I'm going to let my elbows travel just slightly in front of my wrists. There's a reason for that. And that is, we're looking to create a path which is very much almost like a J position. Down to the highest point. Now notice this, I'm going to push back and up. I'll start pushing directly up when I end up over my shoulders. Once again, I'll set up a bit more of an arch this time. So I talked about a J path that we're looking to draw. A J is a little exaggerated. What I sometimes describe it as, it's quite a steep bar path on the way back, almost a diagonal line. As you start to get more and more comfortable with that, it might look a little bit closer to a J. The reason for that is when we take it to the highest point on our chest, it's actually going to take us out of a mechanically a good position. So off of that position, off of our chest, when we're pushing back, we're trying to push back into a mechanically good position. In doing so, we are drawing that J. We don't want to push too far back, where we start going too steep and we push behind our shoulders. Then we're going to go back into a very poor position. Once we push back far enough and we're over our shoulders, go straight up. What you'll notice in that first example is I was hitting the highest point on my chest. That second example, I was going a little too low. An increased range of motion means we're working harder. Again, in powerlifting, we want to shift as much weight as we can. If we can make that lift easier, then we're going to make that lift easier, so long as it's obviously within the rules. In powerlifting, if you are looking to compete, what I would suggest is at least get a paused rep in there, maybe the last rep of your set you're going to pause, or have a dedicated set where every rep is paused, so that you are practicing that. It is a skill. The trick for a paused rep is by making sure you've still got all that leg drive, and you're going to keep that tension in your back the whole time so you don't lose that foundation to press off of. I'm looking to press via my arms and my legs at the same time off of my chest once I've paused. And that really is a skill that will take a long time to master. I certainly haven't done it yet. I tend to initiate with my legs first. But as much as you can practice and try to get simultaneous press via the legs and via the arms to get that weight off of your chest. Once you've completed your set and it's your last rep, finish with your wrists over your elbows and then wrap. Okay, so that's the video on the bench press. I know that is complicated, especially when you're approaching it with a bit more of a powerlifting method. There is still more to talk about. These are the very basics, and what I will do is release a few more advanced videos where I'm going to go into a bit more detail about what I've talked about the bench today.